And welcome back to Insemination, the podcast that is all things donor conceived. My name is Laura High, your chaotic sperm donor baby of the podcast world. And I am excited today because we have an insemination first. For the very first time, we are interviewing an embryo adoptee. I am so excited for you to be hearing Kelsey's story, where she talks about finding out that she's an embryo adoptee, meeting her biological family, her thoughts on embryo donation. It is such a fantastic episode, and we are so unbelievably lucky that she was willing to share it. Before we get to the episode, a few things. This is your weekly reminder that what is happening in the United States is not normal. It is that awful. It is that scary. Do not let your absolutely horrible racist uncle gaslight you into thinking that everything is going to be fine. It will not be. We must take action right now. Right now is absolutely the time where we should be volunteering in our local community grassroots organizations. We should be protesting. We should be rallying. We should be calling our local legislatures every freaking day and reminding them that they work for us. We should be donating. We should be creating art. We should be checking in on our most vulnerable friends and family and neighbors. We must be doing something. We all must be contributing. So please figure out how you can contribute. There are so many ways for us to add. Please find your way. And an amazing analogy for this is Lord of the Rings. Any excuse to bring up Lord of the Rings, I will. You have to remember that Gimli contributed his axe. His axe was needed and valuable. Aragorn had his sword, which was incredibly valuable and needed. Legolas had his bow, incredibly valuable and needed. And Sam had his salt. Yes, it wasn't a bow, it wasn't an axe, it wasn't a sword, but it was hope. It reminded Frodo what we are fighting for. The salt counted just as much as the bow, the sword, and the axe. Figure out what you can contribute. Anything from the sword to the salt matters. Everything that we bring to the table can be used for good. Figure out what your sword or your salt is. And with that, I would like to give some safety tips as we are heading into some pretty dark and scary times. To my amazing, wonderful, intended recipient parents or already recipient parents, part of the LGBTQIA community. If you have not gotten your second parent adoption, I beg you to please get that done now. Having your names on the birth certificates is not enough to guarantee safety for your family unit. Please take all precautions that are necessary at this time. If you do not know where to get a lawyer to do this, don't worry. I got you. You're going to go on to my Instagram at LauraHigh5, and there is a recent post that says list of lawyers who will do a second parent adoption. It looks kind of like it has sunsetty colors, and it has lawyers listed per state who will do this. I beg you to get this done. Now, all states have different laws on how second parent adoptions work. Now, getting the second parent adoption, if you're in like the state of California, it should be fairly simple. If you're in a different state, it might be a lot harder and you might end up spending a lot of money. I know this is going to be a lot of money for some people, but I beg you, it is worth it. We must do everything we can to secure our family units, and I want nothing more than to ensure that members of our amazing, wonderful community make it intact to the other side, because we will get to the other side. And I want all of us to march there hand in hand together. And with that, when you do your second parent adoption, again, please get certified copies of your second parent adoption and of your second parent adoption papers, the birth certificates, everything. Have copies with you that you just bring everywhere that you go. If you're going to the grocery store, the playground, the school, the hospital, you have all of those paperwork. You have all that paperwork with you. I know that sounds very high pressure. I know that sounds scary, but right now we are in scary times. There's no way to sugarcoat this. There's no way for me to soften this. This is scary. We do not have the luxury right now to take chances. I urge everyone to take every precaution necessary. And lastly, if you have embryos in a red state left over from IVF, I beg you, please get them to a blue state where they value autonomy and choice. All right, now after that very scary lecture, we're going to do some housekeeping, which feels really just superficial after I said all of that, but just bear with me, folks. So first off, if you have not subscribed, liked, commented, rated this podcast, please do. That kind of stuff really helps, and I'm going to do my best to keep us up to date on all news that pertains to the fertility industry. If you are a visual learner like myself, remember that we videotape this entire podcast and it is available for you on YouTube. So please go check it out. Follow me on all social media to make sure that you are up to date on fertility news, whether that is TikTok or Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, YouTube, all the good stuff, not X, 'cause fuck X. Also, I'm booked to headline a bunch of places. I mean, I'm booked to do stand-up all the time. So, go check out my schedule at www.laurahighfive.com. But I do have some really cool headlining dates, and you should come because that would be really awesome and nice. So February 7th in New Jersey, I will be headlining with my amazing husband, Dave Colombo, at the Primetime Comedy Club. Tickets are available on my website. Or, I'm so excited, for the very first time, I'm going to be headlining in Boston at the Glovebox Comedy Club on March 21st at 7 p.m. Again, tickets are on my website. And I just got the date rescheduled. Lucas Arnold and I will be co-headlining in Emmaus, Pennsylvania at the Emmaus Theater, June 27th at 8 p.m. So please, go get tickets. Let's have some laughs because for goodness sakes, we need it. I also have some more amazing show dates coming up in another state. I just can't announce it quite yet, but I will be able to announce it probably for the next podcast episode. So, I'm just excited. Anyway, we are going to get to the podcast episode. Yes, we are going to do that. And I'm so excited for you to meet Kelsey. Everyone, meet Kelsey. And welcome to the podcast, Kelsey. How are you doing today in our apocalypse world?
I'm doing all right, as well as can be expected, I would say.
Yes, today I am stocking up on non-perishables. I'm like, all right, so that is check one on my apocalypse list. Already ordered my solar panel charger. But today we are here to discuss your story, which I feel like is very apropos coming up. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so happy to be here. I've learned so much from your podcast, so it's really I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share my story as well.
Oh my, well, first, thank you. That's very kind, but to me, the fact that you're willing to, this is a very vulnerable story. It's a very big story, but your story, the fact that you're willing to share it is huge. I've specifically been asked to share more stories from your perspective on this podcast, but you're the first person who's been willing to come forward. You are officially my first embryo adoptee donor conceived person on the podcast. So thank you. So everybody, round of applause. Everybody, round of applause who's listening. Now, before we start with your story, I always like to ask for terms because everybody has different terms that they like to use. Do you prefer being called an embryo adoptee or an embryo donor conceived person?
Well, for me personally, I prefer the term embryo adoptee just because I feel like the feelings that are kind of involved in me realizing that I was donor conceived and everything very much mirror some of the feelings of the late disclosure adoptee community. And I'm not trying to co-opt any of like that is a whole other thing. That is a whole other set of trauma that I've definitely, obviously the mother that gestated me is the one that raised me. But I think that term just simplifies it for me. And that's how I think of myself.
Well, we've been discovering that there is more, that the adoptee community and the donor conceived community share such a strong Venn diagram, and that's why we're such good allies. And we do have so much in common, but especially as an embryo adoptee, you're even farther in that Venn diagram.
Yeah.
So no, absolutely. And as you spoke about the, parents that raised you, how do you like to refer to your recipient parents? Do you prefer recipient parents, raised parents? What is the term that you'd like to use?
I just call them my parents, honestly. Like if when I'm in like a donor conceived conversation, I can like clarify it, like, oh, the parents
Mhm.
that raised. But even through all of this, I've never thought of my parents as anything less than my parents. So I just call them my parents.
Awesome. And then how do you like to refer to like your biological genetic parents?
Yeah, I just refer to them as my biological parents.
Cool.
Sometimes I use the term genetic parents. It's all the same to me. But yeah, I don't really think of them as my donors per se.
Amazing. All right. I love it. And I really do. I find it fascinating that we all kind of have different uses of words and vocabulary for our recipient parents, donor, everything. And I want to really normalize the fact that we all use different words and that is okay as long as it is coming from that donor conceived person.
Totally.
But let's start at the very beginning of your story. When were you, where were you, sorry, when were you born?
I was born in 2001, so I'm 23 now.
Ugh, God, are you 15 years younger than me? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I didn't realize you were that much younger than me. Holy crap. Okay. So you were 2001, and then so you are an embryo adoptee. What made your biological parents decide to adopt out their leftover embryos?
Yeah, so my biological parents they gotten married a little bit later. They used IVF to have their own two twin boys, and then they had a spontaneous pregnancy with their daughter as well, my biological sister on that in that donor family. And I think that they were just kind of done with kids, which is totally fine. Like
Mhm.
I full respect to anybody. I mean, you make so many IVF embryos, and like I don't think that anybody is obligated to use them all or anything. I know some people believe that for religious reasons, but that's not my perspective. So my biological mother says that the embryos came to her in a dream and said that they wanted a chance at life, which I think is so funny because I think if one of them did come to her in a dream, that was definitely not my embryo. Like I don't think my embryo would care that much. I'm definitely more of a chill embryo who would
Are
not
you do
have
you were an embryo just enjoying being Stardust?
exactly.
Yeah.
I was enjoying my time in the cryo tube, having a good time. But yeah, the embryos came to her in a dream. And I think back then in 2001, it was all kind of done through clinics. I think now there's kind of this interesting like social media driven industry of people doing like private embryo adoptions, which I think is pretty interesting. But yeah, she gave the embryos back to the clinic along with a donor packet of handwritten information and a letter addressed to the embryos about what she wanted for them in life and everything. And the clinic threw that away, so I never got that. But
Oh my
but
God.
yeah, but eventually I would get the packet through a series of events. But yeah, so that's how they decided that.
Okay. And did your biological parents pick your parents? And we're like,
No,
no, okay.
not at all. They fully just gave the embryos back to the clinic. Um, yeah, so they had followed up with the clinic like multiple times after giving up the embryos to see whether or not any children had resulted from that. And even though the clinic did have a record of my twin sister and I's birth, the clinic told my biological parents that no children had resulted from any of their like 14 to 16 embryos. Which is kind of, very scummy of them to do.
That
Um,
is. Well, and your and if I'm remembering correctly, your biological parents specifically were like, we want open contact.
yeah, so that's something that's been very helpful to me and like touching to me throughout this process was the fact that in that donor information packet it said do you want to have contact with your donor children and everything, and they selected like yes, like we do want to be involved in their lives, which I think has been very helpful to me in processing all of this. That I was always wanted, even like throughout every step of this process, I was wanted, which is helpful to me.
So then, with that information, let's talk about your parents.
Mhm.
Why did your parents decide to go the embryo adoption route?
Yeah, so my parents are very strict Catholics. Um, they're very like, they do not
What's
believe
up,
in
Catholic trauma?
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't personally, I'm not Catholic anymore. I kind of got out of
Ditto.
that after 12 years of Catholic school. It's like, okay, this is not for me anymore. Um,
It was I enjoyed the pageantry then, and now I'm in theater, and now it's like, I was like, let's do the pageantry that's less homophobic.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but my mom and dad are super Catholic, and they were having some fertility issues.
Mhm.
And originally, they actually tried to have children using a sperm donor, but that re resulted in several miscarriages. Which of course, I didn't know about any of this until very recently. And obviously, Catholics also don't believe in sperm donation, to my
Yeah.
knowledge.
No, the
Uh,
Vatican has like been against it. I mean, like my parents like technically are Catholic, but they're like real Catholic light.
mhm,
But yeah, no, I mean Catholics in it, and that surprises me because you say your parents are very devout Catholics. So
mhm.
the fact that they did sperm donation is interesting.
I think that like for a lot of Catholics, the rules kind of apply to everybody else, but when you're moved by God in a certain direction, when God's telling you you are always meant to be a mother, then the rules kind of go by the wayside. That's
Well,
what I've experienced.
yeah, like what has been like your mom like when you've asked her like mom, you're Catholic, why did you do sperm donation? Why did you do embryo adoption?
My mom's approach to this, my mom, her identity has always really been rooted in motherhood ever since she was a very small child. Like she told me that she like when she was 4 years old, the only doll that she would play with was a little baby doll, and she always knew that she wanted to have kids. So I think that when my parents realized that they had male factor infertility,
Mhm.
my dad was ready to be like, okay, maybe we're not having kids at that point. But my mom was just like, look, this is happening. Like you're gonna get on board with this because this is happening. Which is just that's just kind of her personality and the way that she deals with things. So I don't really know how she religiously explained that to herself. But yeah, the sperm donation didn't work, so they had to start looking at other more creative options, I guess.
So when they, so what was like the embryo adoption process for them? Like, or at least as much as they've told you, like what were the steps involved when they saw the profile that said like we would like open contact? Like what was the process like?
Yeah, so for my mom, she was reading like the National Christian Register, like some Christian magazine, and even though Catholics are against embryo adoption, it says in I don't know if you're familiar with the encyclical letter from the Vatican, Dignitas Personae, I believe it's called, but it like in no uncertain terms spells out like embryo adoption is not okay because of the psychological ramifications for the children, which I think is like so fascinating that the Vatican has that position. But so even though the Catholics weren't super on board with embryo adoption, there was some Christian magazine that was like, there are thousands and thousands of these embryos just waiting for homes, dying off in their tubes, and you can be a savior. And my mom was like, I'm called to be the savior right now. So she went to the clinic where she had been getting the
Christian
fertility treatment.
saviorism is like my fate. It is a hell of a drug. It's
It
a
really is.
hell of a drug.
Yeah, it's fascinating how, the word of God so clearly is pulling somebody towards exactly what they want. Like, it's people can justify whatever they want
Hmm.
through their religious belief. But yeah, so my mom went to the clinic and was like, "Oh, do you have any embryos for sale?" And sure enough, they did. They had a bunch of these profiles, these packets, and one of them was my biological parents' donor packet. And I kind of asked my mom why this packet? Like what drew you to this packet? And the reason was because my biological mother had written on the packet that she was Ashkenazi Jewish, and her family was from Poland. And my mom was like, "Oh, I'm Polish, so therefore I'll be the same ethnicity as the kid," which is not true because, like, obviously Ashkenazi ethnicity is its own thing. It's not really the same as just being like regular, not regular Polish, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, we're
Um,
both Ashkenazi Polish. Like we actually might be connected. We might be like second, third cousins here.
yeah, I'll have to check my 23 and Me,
Yeah, we
but
got to double check that.
yeah. Yeah, but my mom didn't know what being Ashkenazi was, and she didn't know that like Jewishness was tied to ethnicity or anything. So she just thought
That
that
it's an
we would
ethno
be,
religion. Yeah.
yeah, she just thought that we would be related if she chose this donor packet. And she also thought that my biological father looked somewhat like my dad, which I so do not see whatever she was seeing in that packet. Maybe it was like Slim Pickens. Maybe she just was like, okay, I'm just gonna pick one that looks kind of like him. But yeah, so that's how she chose that, and she bought, I think, 4 embryos for $180. I saw the receipt. Um, yeah,
Isn't it
so
weird to see like your receipt that you
it is
we
kind of interesting. Yeah.
it's a thing where it's like I don't like if you don't come it's a very particular lived experience that if you do not have it, it's very hard to explain that it's like no, I came with a price tag.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So then when did your parents go through counseling?
Yeah, yeah. So they had a mandatory counseling because this is in 2001, so there was a little bit more understanding of the issues that come with this.
Mhm.
So the clinic, before they transferred the embryos, had a session of mandatory counseling, and my both my parents tell this story very differently. They have very different recollections of this. My mom says that they just talked to her about, like, oh, like, are you going to be a good parent and everything, and then they just like let them off the hook with the embryos. But from my dad's recollection, he says that the counselor said, we know at this time that the best thing to do is to be completely transparent, to tell the kids that they are donor conceived, and like to from a very young age, like even if you're not going to connect them with the biological parents, still for them to know this information all along. And according to my dad, when my parents walked out of that counseling session, my mom was like, "We're not doing any of that. Like that makes no
Wow.
sense." Um, so like a lot of people kind of have told me through this, like, oh, well, your parents didn't know any better. And I was like, well, they were told better. They didn't like metabolize that information and decide to go with that. But yeah, they did. They were aware.
And so then they also ignored the request of we want open contact with our biological children.
Yeah. Well, both of them said, both of my parents said, like when I brought that up to them, and I was like, look at this document where like these people wanted to be in our lives. Both of them were like, well, like we only read it once, and then we just put it in a box under the bed and never opened it up. But you can't expect us to really have remembered that very important piece of your identity there. So both of them were like, oh yeah, I didn't even notice that that was on there, which I don't know. That could be true. I mean, genuinely, they did put this paper in a box under the bed and then not pull it out for 23 years. So they might be, being very authentic about that experience. So yeah.
How how does that feel to you to know that like whether it was on purpose, it was an accident, like whether it was knowing that like your biological parents did want to be a part of your life and knowing that like your parents, whether it was unintentionally, intentionally, kept that from you.
I think it's really an enormous lost opportunity. Like really, like where I grew up from, where my biological family was for all those years, is like an hour and a half by car away. Like I could have grown up and had like known these people and been able to ask them questions and been raised in some sense with my full biological siblings. And um yeah, that's crazy. It's really it's kind of sad to think about. I think I just have to kind of like I to kind of remember for myself that my parents really were not telling me this and really were being so dishonest because they thought that it was protecting me, and because the lie had kind of the lie had kind of got away from them. Like they just didn't they had no intention of ever telling me. Um, yeah, so they thought it was in my best interest at a certain point just not to tell me, which I disagree with, but it does make it
Yeah.
a little bit easier to know that it wasn't malicious.
How, if you don't mind me asking, how is your relationship with your parents right now after discovering all of this?
Yeah, you know, uh, my relationship with my parents has always been there's always been times, good times and bad times in that relationship. And I think that this has been a stressor on the relationship just because of a lot of times when I try to bring this up in conversation to them, they just don't take it well. They're
Mm.
very they're very defensive. There's a lot of like, well, what do you want me to do about this now? It's all over with. My mom really has the attitude of my mom's very much like, I'm not sorry that I didn't tell you, but I am sorry that you found out. Like she said that like kind of multiple times.
Mm.
And that's something that you want to hear because
No.
for me, I would want to hear, like, I'm so sorry for how this is continuing to impact you. What can I do now?
Yeah.
And that's not really an attitude that either of them are ready to have yet. So I would say this has not like ruined my relationship with my parents in any sense. Um, but it's not great. And I think that if anybody is listening is wondering like, oh, maybe I can just not tell my embryo adoptee child forever. Like you want your relationship to your child to be founded on trust and security. And you don't want your child to look back at it one day and say it was all a lie from the very beginning, because
Yeah.
that's just devastating. So you don't want that to happen.
Also, if I just have a second to like give you your flowers, like you are being utterly understanding and compassionate right now to your parents in a way that it would be more than understanding for you not to be.
Hmm.
And I do want to give you your flowers and go like it my goodness, your compassion and understanding is really quite striking.
Oh,
And I do want to say like I don't know if I would have that in me to be able to do that. And you do not owe that.
oh,
Um, and I'm just very, very taken aback in a positive way. Just it's like, wow, I'm just very I hope your parents can one day understand how lucky they are to have you.
thank you very much for saying that. I think reading so many people's stories of donor conception and late discovery and everything, I think that everyone who has a reaction that's different from mine is also completely valid. Like
Hmm.
if you're dealing with these feelings and you're like, I'm just never going to speak to my parents again, and that's like your authentic truth, and that's like, I think that that is also a valid reaction. It's just for me, I like with all of the kind
Yeah.
of different issues in my relationship to my own parents, I have to think, if I wanted to wait around until I think that they're like sufficiently sorry for this, I'd be waiting for the rest of my life, and I'm just not willing to do that. I'm going to prioritize maintaining the relationship over my personal feelings about
Yeah.
their actions here. So yeah, but thank you for saying that very much.
Oh, no, absolutely. I know that you're not going to probably hear this anytime soon, but your parents are very, very lucky that your heart is as big as it is. Um, yeah. And you are being as patient as you are. Your parents are extremely lucky. And I recognize that. And I know a lot of listeners are going to recognize that as well.
Thank
Um,
you.
how did you find out?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. The circumstances that all fell into place for me to find out are just very so insane. Like I think about it probably once a week that I probably would have gone to my grave never knowing the
Yeah.
if it weren't for the exact domino sequence of events there. But yeah, so I lived several states away from both my parents. My parents are now divorced. And my sister and I made kind of a last minute trip back to go visit our dad for his birthday. And while I was back there, I'm gonna kind of blur some of the details for privacy
Of
here.
course.
But I was back home with at my dad's place, and I stumbled upon some information that made me question whether or not I was my parents' biological child. I think I'll leave it at that. There was something that made me think, huh, that's weird. That's not what I would expect.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so we kind of had that trip back where my parents live, and I actually flew back to the state that I live now because I'd already scheduled a flight and everything. And my sister, my twin sister, who's also obviously an embryo adoptee, was staying back at my mom's place for a few more days after that. And I was like, hey, like you might want to just look into this, like see if there's any medical records for you or I or anything that might suggest anything like this. Um, yeah, so my sister went and she, with my mom's permission, she was like, I'm just gathering medical information to bring back to our current home estate for our new doctor. And she found a receipt for an IVF embryo transfer. And my sister brought it up to my mom and was like, "Hey, Mom, we're super Catholic, and
Mhm.
you don't believe in IVF. Our Kelsey or like my sister and I like embryo adoptees or not embryo adoptees, but are we IVF babies?" And yeah, my mom completely broke down and she was like, "Yeah, like I need to tell you the truth." So my mom brought out to my sister that donor packet that had been under the bed for 23 years.
Wow.
And um and my sister got to look through it and it was all anonymized, obviously, but it was all this medical information and this personal information about, what my biological parents do for work and what their interests are and all the similarities there. And then on the last page, it was this photo of my biological family, of like my biological mother and my biological father, and then our three siblings. And I can't even describe what it's like to grow up and never really seeing anybody in my family that looked like me in any way. Like never thinking like, oh, I look so much like mom in this picture, or I look so much like dad as a baby, or anything like that. And like never really knowing that I was missing that. And then all of a sudden, here's a photo, and there's this woman, and I just saw her, and I was like, that's exactly what my sister is going to look like in like 20 years. Like it
Wow.
like reframed my reality in an instant, because it was just a picture, and I like it looked so much like me. I could instantly like map my own features onto that and think like, this is who I come from. Um, and looking at that photo, like my sister sent it to me immediately, and I was sitting there staring at it, and I was like, "What if this is all we ever get of them? What if we have this photo, and this is all the only information that we're ever able to find? And what if they're dead, and or they don't want anything to do with us? And these like three little kids who are now going to be who knows how old? Like, what if I've been walking down the street and I've already passed one of my siblings and I didn't know it. Like
Yeah.
there's just this like storm of emotion and questions that came along with that photo.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's how we found out.
So obviously that picture wasn't the only thing you got.
Mm.
What was it like connecting to your biological family?
Yeah, so I give full credit to that to my sister. She's like such an internet sleuth. She was able
I
to
love an
really put it
internet
together.
sleuth. You make the world go round.
Yeah, like I was looking at this and I was searching, so I had like my biological parents like professions and everything. So I was like searching like, such and such profession in such and such city. And like I was coming up with nothing. I was like, oh my gosh, we're never gonna find them. This is doomed. I was thinking I'm just gonna have to start posting this on Facebook everywhere and being like somebody. But my sister is like super very tech savvy. And
Yeah.
she took this photo, which was like a photo, like a black and white photocopy of a photo from like 2001 or I guess 97 or whenever my embryo had been made. And she used like some digital tool to enhance it. And then she used the PIM Eyes software online, which if anybody else is in this very rare predicament where you have a photo of your biological family, but you don't know how to find them, use PIM Eyes online, because
Wow.
it's a facial recognition software. And she just like had this digitally enhanced photo of our biological father's face, and she ran it through this, and then instantly a match to his professional website for his job and everything. And like she sent it to me, and immediately I saw it, and I was like, he looks just like me. Um, yeah, yeah. So that's how we found them. And her and I were kind of different minds when we first found them. We were like, okay, we don't have a DNA test result to like prove that we're their kid, and like they might not even want to talk to us, and they might have just like given these embryos and might just be like, okay, these are not our kids. We don't want anything to do with them. And so my sister was like, okay, maybe we should give it some time. We should think about this. And I was like, absolutely not. I was like, I'm already messaging them on Facebook right now. like the
I'm
message
much
is
more
already
of your
being
mind
sent.
where I'm like, yeah, don't try and stop me. Like we are
Yeah,
full speed ahead.
yeah. Yeah, so I found his Facebook profile, and he's like Facebook friends with my biological mother because they're married, obviously. So I put them in a group chat, and with my sister and I on Facebook, and we just sent a picture of them, and we're like, "Hey, I know this sounds crazy, but we think we might be your biological children, and here's why."
Totally normal DM to send. Like that is
Yeah,
an everyday
absolutely.
occurrence. Yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't reply for a few days because I guess if you're not Facebook friends with somebody, it just goes to spam or whatever.
It does.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I was like, I used Facebook stalked their profiles to find the Facebook profiles of my biological siblings, and I was like, okay, I'm absolutely just gonna like we were very scared to reach out to the siblings because I was worried, what if we're like going to destroy this family right now? Like what if these
Yeah.
kids
It's
don't
so
know?
tricky. It's so
Yeah,
tricky because you don't know.
yeah. Like what if they didn't
Mhm.
they didn't know that their parents ever donated embryos? What if they're not comfortable with the idea that they
Yeah.
have full siblings out in the world? Like they just might not be their thing, and that's
Yeah.
okay. But after a few days of having no response from our biological parents, like I was overwaiting. I was like, I'm not, we're not waiting anymore. Which I think if I could do it all over again, maybe I would have really just given it some time with the parents first and not the siblings. But we actually heard back from the siblings first. And we just had created this group chat and been like, hey, I know like sounds insane and like everything, but we think that we might be your biological siblings. Can you please like forward this information to your parents? And immediately we got this response back where one of them was like, "Oh my gosh, my parents always told me that they donated embryos, but they always said that none of them ever stuck. That's so crazy. We always wondered whether there might be siblings out there. I'll send this to my mom right away." Like this very
Wow.
like so friendly, so joyous.
Oh, that makes me so happy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very, very sweet. Um, yeah, and then we got an immediate response from the biological parents on Facebook, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, we're so happy to hear from you. We're so happy to hear that you exist. Like this is so crazy. Like please let's meet up and let's talk." And I was back in my home state by that point, but my sister was still in the state where my biological
Mhm.
parents live, and literally within like 3 days or something, or maybe not 3 days, maybe like 4 to 5 days of finding out this truth about us being embryo adopted, my sister was meeting up with our biological parents in person,
Wow.
um, which like so crazy.
Yeah.
This so crazy
So
how
this
things
was
work
all
out.
within like what, a week?
Yeah, it was a pretty wild week.
Oh my God. So you in a week found out you were an embryo adoptee and now we're meeting biological family.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is some whiplash right there.
It really was. It was really illuminating. I think it tested my I was like I think that there's kind of no singular other piece of information that I've ever received in my entire life that has so thoroughly changed my sense of identity, especially in such a limited amount of time
I can't
than this.
I can't imagine. I can't.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. But So yeah, so I was back where I live now. I was going to work and being a normal functioning human and trying to kind of emotionally deal with all this, which I think I actually like it wasn't as hard on me emotionally as I could like as it could have been. I think I was very even keeled about it for the most part. Like I've never like cried about it. I've never really had like a breakdown about it. It's kind of just been more of an analytical process of
Mm,
discovery, more as opposed to an emotional process of discovery for me. Which that's that for my sister, she's definitely been a little bit more. Um, it's impacted her emotionally a little bit more than myself, I would say. I think
yeah.
everyone deals with it differently. Um, yeah, but yeah, I was kind of back in my home state trying to kind of deal with this on my own, and my sister was dealing with it back home with being around my dad and my mom and meeting our biological parents and bearing the forefront or the brunt of that emotional experience.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so it's very when I think back on that time, it's I'm kind of sad for myself because of how much it changed my sense of who I was. I think that
Mm,
now I have a better kind of understanding that this was revealing new information about myself, but I am still the same person that I was before the discovery. But that's not how I felt immediately after. Like I remember as soon as my sister sent that picture of our biological family, I was actually at work when I got that. And I just literally went to like the work like the bathroom at my office. And I was just staring at my face in the mirror and being like, I'm a stranger. Like I was looking at my face and I was like looking, I was like, whose eyes are these? Like
yeah.
where does this come from? So yeah, so but like I'm still me at the end of the day. So it just took some work to get there and a lot of therapy.
We love therapy. We are massive fans of therapy here. And I think that that is more than understandable that you went on that journey and that you probably still are going on that journey and there's going to be waves of that. And everything
Mhm.
that you've said, I mean, I've heard that echoed by so many donor conceived people. Like that is so within our realm of just like, yeah, of course, that is one of the many things that we consistently experience.
Mhm.
I remember the first donor conceived person I ever met, and she asked me, she was like, "Did you ever look in the mirror and think like what?" Because she this person was also sperm donor conceived, and she was like, "Do you ever look in the mirror and go like, okay, so this my eyes are like my mom's, but like what's different?" And trying to piece together what might belong to the donor. And I'm like, holy
Mhm.
shit, yes, I do. I thought I was being a little weirdo here. And I'm very grateful that you shared that because I really want that experience to be understood that that's just normal in our community. And it is
Yeah.
something that so many of us experience. What has it been like connecting to your biological family? Like, have you like, have you been like going like, oh, that's where I get that from? Because you've already said like, that you look a lot like them, but what about like pieces of your personality?
Yeah.
Your interests, your hobbies, your job, anything like that.
Yeah, there are it's like actually amazing the similarities, like things that I would have anticipated of like being similar, But literally I had the same major in undergrad as my biological sibling sister from that donor family. Like
Wow.
I'm like, my biological father and then my bi two biological brothers and my biological sister are all in the same industry that I'm like getting into in terms of work and like just even like little things like my biological father is a writer and he's like published several books and for me I write literally every day. Like, I've just gotten like little things published in like little student magazines and everything. I was like, oh my gosh, like this interest that I've had in writing that doesn't come from mom and doesn't come from dad, like seems like it's where it came from. Yeah, it's just talking to them for the first time because when my sister went and met them in person, I got in on the Zoom call to kind of like talk to them for the first time. And I like it's indescribable to like find these things out about the people that made you for the first time. Like all the questions I had for them and just like it was like everything was clicking into place. It's like this is where I come from. This is where I get all of these pieces of my personality, you know like even more so when I would eventually meet my biological siblings, I would be like, oh my gosh, like we would in another life we would have been so close and we would have been like, BFFs. Um, but yeah, so it really there are so many similarities. I don't even know what the like I'm very into biology and everything. I don't know what the biological mechanism for those types of things would have been. I mean, it might just all be a coincidence. That's totally it could be that as well. But it's crazy how like these interests seem to be genetic in a way.
Yeah.
Do you need help finding your biological parents? Whether you're donor conceived, adopted, or an NPE, please contact DNA Angels. DNA Angels is a nonprofit team of genetic genealogists that help you identify your biological parents. And this group is run by donor conceived people, adoptees, and NPEs, so they will emotionally have your back during this process. DNA Angels has identified almost 5,000 biological parents since 2019 using test results from Ancestry DNA. And they are a nonprofit because they believe that your financial situation should not stop you from identifying your family. If you are searching to identify and possibly connect with your biological donor or missing parent, please reach out to dnangels.org. Must be at least 14 to apply, have tested at Ancestry, and presumed parents born in the United States of America.
Right now, there is been a huge push for embryo adoption. Like, we're just seeing that constantly in the news. As an embryo adoptee, how are your feelings on embryo adoption? How do you think about it? How do you feel about it? Yeah. Because I'm
Yeah, okay.
constantly asked this question all the time. And I'm like, I don't really get to speak to embryo adoptees, and I don't want to speak about it too much until I can talk to freaking one of you.
hmm My feelings on embryo adoption as a whole are very complex. So I'm going to try to be very careful with my
We
words. And if I
love
say anything,
complex. We
yeah,
love nuance. I love
yeah,
nuance. Let's go into the weeds.
yeah. Okay. I'm gonna start off that conversation of is embryo adoption like a good idea by saying, for me personally, I am very happy to be alive. I'm very grateful to be here. I love my life. I have joy and whimsy and every day. I'm glad to be alive. I think that saying that, I can also say that I don't think that the industry, as it is right now for embryo adoption, is ethical. And that's not to say that all embryo adoption is unethical.
Mhm.
I think that there is a way to do it in a way that can be ethical. And I also think that 90% of the way that it's being done is not good for the child. And I think that like something an interesting issue in terms of embryo adoption that doesn't really come up with the rest of the donor conceived community is the religious aspect of people having this moral crisis over the fate of these frozen embryos that are existing from people doing IVF, and
Mhm.
people thinking that the solution is to just adopt them out. Uh, and that's like saving them, and it's going to be the solution to infertile couples, it's gonna be the solution for
Mhm.
the embryos. I think that that's very misguided.
Yeah.
I think that when you're doing adoption, you are literally creating an adoptee. There are going to be complex feelings that that person might grow up with as a result of that, as a result of uh, not being biologically related to either parent, and especially for people who are closed embryo adoptees who are not going to get the chance to know their biological family. That's a very hard thing to grow up with. I mean, for me personally, I didn't obviously didn't know until I was an adult that I was an embryo adoptee. But there was always a feeling of being out of place in my family. There was always, this wondering of where did I get this and why do I look like this? And there was always this otherness and like why can't I be like my cousins?
Mm.
I think that if you don't tell your kid that they're an embryo adoptee, they're going to grow up with those pervasive feelings of otherness. If you do tell them, but it's a closed embryo adoption, then they're going to deal with complex feelings of what is my biological family like? What if I had been an embryo that was kept by them instead of an embryo that was sent over here?
Mhm.
Um, I think that really the only ethical dynamic is a fully open, fully transparent, early disclosure embryo adoption in which the families are very much like in communication with each other. So the child does know their biological parents. I think that's the only ethical way to do it. And people are going to disagree with
Yeah.
me and say that I'm killing babies by by saying that, but that's my opinion.
But I think that's a very reasonable opinion. I mean, I think that, like, what transparency being the good thing, like, yeah, guy, like, the more we go down life, the more we realize that, yes, transparency is good. We like openness and all of the information out on the table. Do you believe, like, I mean, now that you have met your biological family, obviously you know what your life was like with your parents. Do you think that, like, can you tell me, like, in what ways you think that it would have been beneficial for you to have been in contact with your biological family? Still being like, your parents are your parents, you're still being raised by your parents, but at least having that contact with your biological parents. How would that have been helpful to you?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many ways that I could think of that would have been beneficial to me. I mean, growing up, I had some like very deep body image issues. And
Mhm.
I think like I obviously people can have those without being donor conceived and everything. But I think that part of it for me was just like I look so different from both my parents, and I always knew that. And I just really, really like hated the way that I looked. And I had like I just really had a lot of self-loathing around that as like a preteen going into my teenage years. I think that if I had people in my life, I mean, obviously I had my sister, but if I had other people in my life who looked like me, that might have been very, very helpful just to know. Like, 'cause my biological mother is just very beautiful, and my biological father is very handsome, and they look a lot like me. If I had been able to see myself in people I think that that genetic mirroring would have been very helpful for my self-esteem as a kid. And
Mm.
beyond that aspect, I just think you know, well, first of all, for medical history, like I do have a medical history, and my biological family has a medical history. And that would have been really helpful to know in various healthcare
You know,
related scenarios.
basic health, life, wellness, all those things, all good. Yeah, we love
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And just also, my sister and I going off to college and everything, and I'm just picturing how that would have been different if I had a supportive biological family. And all of my biological siblings, all three of them, are very, very successful, and they went to very successful colleges and everything. And I'm picturing what my life would have been like with that additional support, and knowing that my big brothers were going off to the schools that they were going to, and having that to aspire to. Um, and my sister and I, we like she's the closest person in my life, right? Like we've always just been so close to each other. And imagining that I could have had three other siblings in my life as supportive people and
Mhm.
role models and everything, I feel like that really would have changed my life in a very substantial way. And also, like to bring this up as well, my family dynamic at home was not always the best. My parents got divorced, and their marriage was very acrimonious a lot, like at various times. It was not a healthy home environment, off and on for many years. And if there was this whole family like an hour and a half down the road, I could have seen that as an amazing resource to me. There's several instances that I can think of that would have been really helpful. And then even just to, once my parents did get divorced, just to have like this a married couple in my life that were just a good example of
Mm.
people like a loving family that would have been just good to look up to in some sense as well.
I mean,
Yeah.
we constantly say it takes a village, yet for some reason we really reject it.
Hmm.
And to me, this sounds like, yeah, this absolutely, it takes a village. Whereas, like, yeah, okay, your parents were struggling. My parents are divorced as well. And, those are very hard times. And the ability of, like, okay, right now our house is going through some shit. How about you go over to your bio fam, go have lunch, go spend the weekend while we deal with this, so that to ensure you're going to be okay. You have a nice calm environment, go to the movies, it's okay. Like that
Hmm.
to me is like what a phenomenal resource to have as parents as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just thinking about how like that really would have rescued me in a lot of scenarios. And that's exactly what my parents were afraid of too. Like I've had this conversation so many times with my mom about like, like why didn't you ever think that, this would be something that would be good for me to know? And so often she's just like, well, I'd be worried that we would get into a fight and you would say, you're not my real mom. You'd go off and live with your bio mom. Um, which is like obviously that would not have happened. I mean, I've just never been that kind of an emotional person to be able to be like, I hate you, you're not my real mom. But that was
Yeah.
a very real fear for her. Yeah, so it's so hard because to think of my parents as like the gatekeepers of this biological family, like they literally were standing in the way of like they saw those kids in that photo from that packet from 23 years earlier, and they knew that their two daughters had three other siblings out in the world, and they just made that gatekeeping decision that should never be something that we would know. Like that just still blows my mind sometimes about
Yeah.
um everything they knew and decided not to tell us. But but yeah, it would have been good to have them around for sure.
Well, it's based off of insecurity, as you said. It's not based off in at least, okay, like please, I'm making a jump here, and if I am wrong, please stop me. But to
Mm,
me, it sounds like all this decision was made off of insecurity. It wasn't made off of genuinely thinking what's best. It was about them and not about you.
I agree. It was very much about them and their uh need to kind of assert that like I am your mother, I am your father, like you
Hmm.
have to defer to me. Which is just again going back to like that Catholic background and my
Yeah.
parents are pretty conservative politically and everything. Um yeah, there just wasn't the room for them to consider what might have been best for my sister and I growing up and what would have helped our kind of psychosocial development, which I think they have a better idea about that now through all the conversations that we've had.
Well, I think it perpetuates, and people really don't understand how. I mean, I think this is a problem with children in general, but like especially, I will say with donor conceived people, embryo adoptees, and adoptees, and I'm like, obviously, you have both legs in both communities. There is this feeling of we are property because
Hmm.
we were paid for,
Hmm.
and it is something that I really wish that people who are not in our community could make space for and
Hmm.
understand how much we are commodified and how many members of our community are. I mean, the feeling like property is like it's put on blast. And I just really wish that people outside of our community could understand that.
Yeah, I honestly think that in terms of commodification, that is one thing that embryo adoptees have like better than people who are just born from sperm or egg donation. Because like listening to all these donor conceived stories and hearing about people who like literally know how much their sperm donor was paid to like like inseminate in a cup and then give it like that is so crazy to me. Something that I'm grateful for in that process is that I know that my embryo was a byproduct to my biological parents creating their own family. Like they were not incentivized in any sense to give a gamete. They're not paid for the egg, they were not paid for the sperm. They were literally just creating their family. And I was a byproduct to that, which is something that I really appreciate because like I I feel like some people who are like the wonderful podcast that you had last week with the donor who was like very narcissistic and was just doing it to just like there are so many reasons that
Yeah.
somebody might donate for the absolute wrong reasons, and I'm lucky that in my case
Yeah.
both of my biological parents were doing it for the right reasons, if that makes sense.
No, totally. I will say, just to throw this in there, there are embryo adoptees who were treated more like a who were more of a transaction. I'm glad
Mm,
that you were not, but I have spoken to there also have been some people who within the egg donor conceived community, embryo community, like where it's been the IVF was too much for the parents or that person to pay for. So the doctor was like, "Well, give us your leftover eggs, give us your leftover embryos to help offshoot the cost."
oh, that's so terrible. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't even imagine if that like for that to be your story and for you to
Yeah,
learn that. That's so terrible. It's
that's
like the
some
whole egg
psychological
sharing thing.
trauma. Like I don't know how
Yeah,
you figure that one out. Like that's rough. That
yeah,
you were the offshoot. You were the offset.
yeah.
Like
That's terrible.
yeah, I can't. So I do want to make sure that if anybody is out there thinking about embryo donation or anything or everything, like just please understand that um there's a lot of different ways it happens. Um
Absolutely. Yeah, for
it,
sure.
Now, one of the things that you and I discussed that I also want to be very, very careful because obviously we want to we need to keep your identity careful, but you are in some like embryo donor groups and you kind of are there almost just a troll. And
Yes.
I would love, which I love,
Hmm.
because you're using your years of Catholic school of, biblical resources and quotes, like you're using it for trolling, which I love. Can you share like some of the stuff that like you have seen in these groups, in these private groups, just to like let everybody know like what's happening.
Yeah, the online space of people finding or donating embryos is just such like an ethical. I would love for a bioethicist to read some of the ethicist to read some of these these posts that people are making and just be able to analyze them because it blows my mind on a daily basis. These people genuinely do believe that every embryo that's created in IVF needs to be implanted, and that anybody who's creating IVF embryos and is discarding them is committing the sin of abortion. Like that's like actually an attitude that people are having. So people are trying to find whatever embryos they can, and regardless of the health history, and regardless of they're having multiple embryos from multiple families. It's really people are looking to get their hands on whatever embryos they can, in a lot of cases as quickly as possible. And people who aren't sure about whether or not they want to donate their embryos and are just dipping their toes in the water, they're getting bombarded online with these messages of people being like, "Don't let your babies die. I'll take them right now." It's very strange. It's
Oh my
very
God.
strange for sure. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's okay.
yeah, there these conversations that people are having on these posts. A lot of times, I try to step in. I just got kicked out of a group recently because
Oh
some
no,
yeah,
you
I
were
get kicked out of a lot of
filed.
these groups. Yeah. Um, I got kicked out of one because somebody was posting in this group and was saying like I'm specifically looking for an anonymous donor embryo where the biological parents are already like in their 70s so that they can be like grandparents and then like obviously like die eventually as that I can be like the true mother to this embryo. And I was like, that's just such a bad idea because your kid's gonna grow up and like like, oh, what happened to your biological family? Oh, they're 70 years old and the way that people interact with the concept of donor embryos is just completely through the lens of a very self-serving saviorism. Yeah, people have a very limited concern for the actual. They have this enormous concern for the embryo and such a limited concern for the actual child that will result from that embryo. It's very interesting to look at.
That was that was a very deep cut, and I genuinely I don't know how we can top it right there. So, holy crap, that one just kind of took my breath away of just um one of so there I have two last questions for you.
Sure.
One, um in the donor conceived community, we are a diverse community. It's not like we're just one thing. We're many things. We have egg donor conceived people, sperm donor conceived people, we have double donor conceived people, and we have embryo adoptees, donor conceived people as well. What can the donor conceived community do better to make space for embryo adoptees, embryo donor conceived people? Because we as a community also need to do better.
I think we need to learn why people are motivated to do embryo adoption and try to educate them in like a harm reduction type of way because people are going to continue to do embryo adoption because they do think that they are saving these embryos, and you're never going to be able to convince somebody away from that because that is their sincerely held religious belief.
Mhm.
So I think that instead of when somebody is doing embryo adoption and you run into a recipient parent that is pursuing that, I think that the foremost concern needs to be educating them about early disclosure and open embryo adoption. And because you're just going to have to reduce the harm. You're never going to be able to stop somebody from doing this, even though I disagree with the way that they're doing it.
Mhm.
I think that we need to like kind of lead with a lot of kindness for the recipient parents, um, because that those people, the recipient parents, are the people who are going to be shaping the lives of this next generation of donor conceived people. I feel like it was so uncommon back in 2001, and we're going to start seeing so many more people who have stories just like me,
Yeah.
who are going to be, late disclosure, and it's going to change the landscape of donor conception. And especially with how there's this political push to keep doing embryo adoption and everything. I think we need to prepare for that and
Yeah.
just education, 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 education. That would be my what
Yeah.
I would advise.
Well, I do think that I would really like to see more embryo adoptees like yourself coming more to the forefront because I do think that people always ask me what is the future like what is the future of donor conception going to look like? What is donor conception, the fertility industry going to look like under this new Trump presidency? And I'm like, if I have to put my money on somewhere, we're going to see a massive push for embryo adoptees. And I
Mhm.
do of embryo adoption. I think that that's what we are looking like. And we need desperately to be preparing for that and ensuring that voices like yourself have the microphone because I think there's going to be I think there's going to be not just a massive push for embryo adoption, it's going to be a massive push for very, very unethical embryo
Mhm.
adoption. And you, with the lived experience, your voice is worth its weight in gold. And I would love to take this moment to call all embryo adoptees to the front. We're going to need you.
Mhm.
And with that, is there, as we wrap up, is there anything that I have not asked you? Is there not anything that I haven't brought up that you're like, Laura, I need to say this, this nut must be said, or I didn't tell you this little piece of my story? Like, is there anything that we didn't cover that you feel like is impertinent, that is pertinent?
I would like to say to anyone who is considering embryo adoption, um, when my mom was going into it, I asked her the question, did you do embryo adoption instead of, adoption of an infant or a child, which also comes with its own moral and ethical issues.
Hmm.
And the reason that she didn't pursue those options is because she wanted the pregnancy experience. She had this kind of idea that she would have this bonding with my sister and I in the womb, and we would be protected from this trauma, and we would never know that we were embryo adopted, and that we would have this amazing mother-child bond.
Hmm.
And I think that is kind of misguided. When you're having an embryo adoptee, you are creating an adoptee, and they're going to have biological parents and a biological root in this world, regardless of whether or not it's acknowledged. And an embryo adoptee is just not a blank slate baby. Regardless of what you personally feel about that embryo adoptee, they're their own person with their own history and their own story. So if you're going into it thinking that this is the solution to infertility trauma, it's really not. Yeah, so go in with an understanding that the person that you gestate is going to have a complex emotional identity as an adult. That's what I would say.
I'm also going to kind of go a little look of behind the scenes, and because I would love for you to mention something that you mentioned to me when we first talked on the phone, was when your mom said, "I really wanted this pregnancy experience." Your reaction was, "I'm not just an experience, like I'm a
Mhm.
person," and that really hit me, and I really wanted to share that what you said because I found that very, very profound.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think people are have a false idea of everything that happens in the womb and all the like epigenetic impact that has on the child. I mean, that is a real biological truth about epigenetics and everything.
Mhm.
But I still have a biological mother in the world, and who gestated me does not really change that. But of course, I love my mother. If you're listening to this and you're judging my parents and everything, which is like valid, they did make some bad decisions. My parents will always be my parents. There's nothing, no act that could make me think of them as anything less than mom or dad. And the fact that I'm not genetically related to them does not diminish that. And I really wish that they would have understood that as well.
Well, I would say I think it really proves that because even with everything you have found out, even with everything you have gone through, even with finding out they've lied to you, you're still saying that.
Mhm.
So I think you are really proving the point of like, yeah, of course they're my parents. Of course like you are really proving that point. And my goodness, I really hope that intended recipient parents and recipient parents really can hear that. If Kelsey, after going through every fucking thing she's gone through, is still like, they are my parents, shut the fuck up. My goodness, have some faith in your freaking kid.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Well, Kelsey, thank you for sharing your story and coming forward. I believe me, this is huge, and you are our first time embryo adoptee on the podcast. So woohoo! Thank you. I know that we need to. You're not out there like we're protecting your privacy, obviously. Um, if people had questions for you, is there a way for them to safely send them to you, or is that just not something that's on the table?
Yeah, if you have any questions, I guess leave them in the YouTube comments, and I have like a random fake username, but I'll specify like this is Kelsey responding.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm
No,
happy to.
that's amazing. So everybody, if you do have questions for Kelsey, write them in because we know that we filmed this. We know it's going to be put on YouTube for free. Go to my YouTube, Laura High, High. Write them in the comment section. Kelsey, I'll keep an eye out in the comment section. I'll make sure that she sees them. She'll answer them. So if you got questions, just go right there. That's absolutely perfect. Well, Kelsey, thank you. Thank you so much. And I wish you nothing but luck as your journey continues. And I hope it continues to be enlightening and healing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really have appreciated this opportunity to share my piece here.
Oh, thank you. No, it's trust me, we got the it's insemination's privilege over here to have you on. But thank you again and have a fantastic day.
You too.